Students around the world are finishing their qualifications so they can get ahead in life and make their contribution. If you are studying, researching, or thinking about it, you will need practical tips, techniques, coaching, and support to help you get finished and be successful. I'm Peter Alkemer, the Student Success Coach, and welcome to the podcast. Each episode, I interview successful students and leaders in education so that you will learn everything you need right here. You will learn about writing, completing your thesis and other projects, planning, discipline, how to get more done, supervisors, getting published, getting finished, how to have the right discipline, and many other aspects of student life. Whether you're listening on Spotify, iTunes, Google, or any other podcast platform, please leave a rating and a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. Either way, please get in touch and let us know what you think of the show and what you want to hear more of. Please always check the show notes for links to courses, material, and plenty more so that you can use what you've learned in each episode, take action, and achieve your student success. Please also join the Student Success Coach community in our exclusive members-only Facebook group where I post regularly and you can interact with fellow students just like yourself. Remember, you can't do this alone, so reach out, get involved, and take advantage. It's my commitment to your success. Now for this week's episode.
Cool. I'm with you.
Excellent. Stacey, hello and welcome to the Student Success Show podcast. It's just fantastic to have you on, and I've been wanting to do this for so long because, you know, in my view, you're such a shining example of a successful student. So I want to talk about your 5 degrees, or is it 6 or 4? I've lost count. 4. Okay, fantastic. Well, I want to get into some of that as soon as possible. But Stacey, what I'm sort of really most interested in, and let's maybe start there, is, you know, just your background in leadership in an education perspective. So, sure. I mean, just let's start with that, and then let's work back through your long and successful academic career. But for people listening, I think, you know, the biggest question that's going to be on their minds is, you know, when they go in and they enroll at a large institution like university, you know, how focused is the leadership on supporting them to be successful? So, you know, just give us a context of your background in leadership in education, and more recently your very prominent role at Wits University. So, Stace, welcome to the show, and give us just a bit of background and context from that perspective.
Super. Peter, thank you very much for having me on your show today. And thank you very much for the very kind words and very kind sentiments. So getting straight into it, the role that I hold within Wits University is essentially the president or the chairperson of the Wits Convocation. Now, what that essentially means is it is an executive structure within the university where I'm supported by 10 EXCO members. And basically the constituency of the Convocation EXCO represents the largest constituency of the university, meaning we represent the graduates or alumni as well as lecturers of the university, which comprise about 200,000 people. So that's certainly quite something to wrap one's head around. It's a very large position. And that also allows me a seat on the University Council, which is essentially the executive decision-making body of the university. So yeah, that's a little bit on the university side. I guess the wonderful fortune of being in such a position, other than obviously working alongside the likes of an Adam Habib or a Zeblon de la Kazi. Also the great fortune of meeting Mamacheti Pakeng, who's now on the UCT side, is the opportunity to engage and network with other individuals who have achieved amazing things within their work careers. So I think that has certainly given me a very high benchmark, I guess, to perform against, and certainly alongside some very prestigious individuals within the South African country, within the continent.
So Stacey, just break down for me, I mean, that point that you mentioned about representing 200,000 people effectively. I mean, just give me a breakdown of exactly those people. And I think you mentioned alumni. So obviously lots of people who have been through Wits, either at an undergraduate level and probably quite a few at postgraduate level. What is that community like, and what have you seen in terms of any patterns of success that correlates between, their contribution in a Wits University context and then going on into the rest of the world? We often hear of sort of one or two great names that pop up, etc. But what's your view in terms of the broad community that you're involved with?
I mean, it's. I'm going to be a little bit biased here. Obviously, I'm a Witsie through and through. So all 4 degrees of mine were obtained at Wits University. I know you're a Wits PhD yourself. So I think that if you were to drill down into the numbers and take a look at the performance of specifically Wits University graduates, you'll see that these are some of the most successful people coming out of the country from a leadership perspective, from a social impact perspective. The most number of millionaires are Wits graduates. So that's certainly something to be said from the institution's perspective. Obviously, having played a very in the history of education within South Africa, I think that the brand in itself holds something exceptionally strong, and I feel that the Wits alumni, the Wits community, certainly hold the prestige very close to their hearts, and are very proud to walk away with a Wits degree.
So Stacey, I mean, yes, they walk away with that degree, but to what, how much do they stay in close contact with Wits and sort of contribute back to students who are still trying to get through, the system, if I can call it that? And we all only really sort of realize the value of that degree probably, once we've completed it. But for many people and many that are listening, they might be struggling and at various stages of their degree. And to what extent is that alumni community being, leveraged to help the current students? And is that a role that you're involved in and something that you help out with?
Yeah, very strongly. So we hold the closest relationships with the Alumni Relations Office, as well as the DFO, the Development and Funding Office. And in respect of our alumni engagement, we pretty much target everything from students that have graduated some like 50 years ago, so hosting founders to maintain those sorts of networks, to an executive think tank where the university hosts webinar sessions and allows some of the most prestigious graduates in the country, including CEOs and senior execs, to engage, network, etc. And we maintain very open lines of communication between the general graduate population, and always welcome interactions and engagements via our alumni office, as well as all the big social media channels where we're active and constantly engaging.
And Stacey, what do you see as some of the common themes in those conversations? And I mean, you've almost got a front row seat, to all of this interaction between these big names and successful people that have got a Wits degree behind them, and then obviously those that are climbing the ladder and also want to get that Wits degree, and maybe coming from very different backgrounds. Culturally, we've got a wide spectrum in this country. What do you see as the big themes, that are emerging, that people are grappling with, and that they are benefiting from, the work that you're doing with the alumni?
So I think the first point that you make is across very, very different backgrounds. And that is one of the most important things that essentially pops up within a university environment, is the fact that people have such different backgrounds. I guess from some of the core topics, very much driven by a multitude of different backgrounds, is obviously the access to education. So lots of conversations of how we're able to accommodate for allowing more of the missing middle students through the doors of not just the Wits universities as an institution, but as a general concept and general principle within and throughout South Africa. I think more modern ways of working have also brought up a lot of questions around remote working and being able to access through digital means. I think that it's very important that we take a step back and understand that not everyone has that sort of access, and that is sometimes a very large complexity in the world of students who don't have a backing of a family member to be able to, get them connected, show them how the device works. So obviously the fees related elements are very large. I think one of the other very core elements that has worked its way into the conversations is around partnerships and collaborations. So this entire concept of shared values, being able to identify where are mutually beneficial relationships that can be set up between prominent individuals that are able to contribute to the university, small businesses, large corporates, organizations, and understand where we're able to plug in an ecosystem that can better play a role in uplifting and impact within the student populations.
I love that concept of an ecosystem because when you walk onto a campus on your first day of your degree, you probably don't get the true sense of the value that you have access to. And often it's just a simple thing like connectivity, which could be a big thing for someone potentially and might just unlock all the value that they can get from that ecosystem. So Stacey, I really want to get into your own individual academic success, but any last thoughts on, particularly in the postgraduate space where, we might have people listening that are sort of saying, well, maybe I'm thinking about doing a degree at Wits, coming back and doing some research, or I've, been a proud Witsie and I'm maybe getting through my postgraduate studies. I know Wits has said they're putting a big focus on postgraduates and trying to get that level of students up in comparison to the undergraduates. I mean, what would be your words of advice to somebody listening in that's, either in the Wits postgraduate system or thinking about it or maybe struggling with it at the moment?
So my words of advice, and obviously again coming from a background where I have a place of very large value on education, is wherever you have the opportunity to access that education, take it with both hands, whether it's formally available through an institution, whether it is through a MOOC, a massive online open course, whether it's watching stuff on YouTube. The access to information is something that is so key and core and critical to human beings in today's world because we have such a democratized access to information. So if you're not leveraging that opportunity, you're certainly missing out. So wherever you're able to obtain more information, whether it's through formal means or not, most certainly all systems go. Important.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stacey. And I know we've had a partnership with edX, and I've been involved in one of those courses. And we had, I think, a very high enrollment from many students around the world. And it was just good to be involved with that MOOC, as you call it. And, I guess who knows what the next few years are really going to hold for the world of education, given the disruption that, we've been through in 2020. But it'll just be fascinating to see, how students access the content. And as you say, the information that is available out there, and it's just a case of whether they can get their hands on the right information that's relevant to them, whether or not that's going to translate into improved student success and students achieving the goals and making the contribution to society that they want to and that we need them to make through this availability of education.
Yeah, absolutely, Pete. I think that you've got it spot on. I think the disruption of 2020 has certainly placed a very different lens and has forced specifically third world countries to understand what are the requirements from a leapfrog perspective. How do we not play just a small catch-up game from a linear perspective, but how are we able to make those massive jumps and get very quick evolution in terms of many of the issues that we're struggling with at the moment.
Stacey, awesome. And I just think that macro perspective, from an institutional leadership perspective, while also engaging on the ground with a broad community. And I really want to maybe get you back on the show, and we can spend a whole episode talking just more about, engaging with the alumni and your role in the convocation, etc. But I really,
Sure.
I want to tap into your insights, as a very successful student yourself. So maybe just walk us through, 4 degrees, what were they? Maybe just the highlights, why did you do 4? Which did you do? What that journey's been like, and looking back on it, what you've gained from it and what the contribution is that you've made over those years.
Yeah. So the qualifications that I set out for, so I have an undergrad in sports or human movement science. I have an honors in general psychology. I have an honors in industrial psychology, and a master's in industrial psychology, along with an HPCSA accreditation as well, so a board exam certified. So I guess the reason that I originally entered into my space, and you'll see, and hopefully this will be a solace for some of the individuals listening here, we enter into an educational environment at the ripe age of 17, 18, 19, some a little bit older, and you go, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Not so. So the reason that I set out with undergrad in sports science is that I was heavily involved in sports and martial arts, actually, from a very young age, and competed internationally with a couple of grand national titles and some international titles as well. And my head was set on maintaining myself in the sports world. Having understood a little bit more around the social dynamics, and I think a lot of the male-dominated teams, and perhaps not such an evolved environment within South Africa in terms of the infrastructure facilities, I veered off a little bit and decided, cool, let's go the psychology route. I started off, as mentioned, with that move into the clinical psychology or general psychology space. And after having done some counseling work, telephonic counseling at a suicide crisis center, SADAG, South African Depression and Anxiety Group, I realized, hey, I'm not so sure that this is something that I'm necessarily cut out for. I'm sometimes a little bit, more of a sensitive soul. So we pivoted again, tried the industrial psychology route, and thought, let's maintain that direction. I think that having some very, very different exposure to those lines of academia was something that assisted in critical thinking, problem solving, rationalizing, reasoning. Because in today's world, I don't practice as an industrial psychologist. I stayed within that industry for probably about call it 3 years or so, and pivoted again. So that's a little bit of a background from the formal work side of things.
Fantastic. And Stacey, the biggest lessons that you took away, you almost could be considered an expert in studying and, gaining these skills, even though, as you say, there were a few pivots. It wasn't an intentional series of steps that you took. You sort of lifted your head and then decided on your next step, etc. But I think at the core of that, each time you pivoted, there was that need for education, there was that need for skills, there was that need to, as you say, learn the problem-solving approach, as well as some of the content maybe relevant to each of those areas that you felt you wanted to go into each time. So Stacey, what I'm interested really in is maybe just, make it practical for us. From your first degree to your fourth, how did you get better and better at studying and being successful in that academic world? And what were some of the things that you learned along the way that only come through experience, that somebody listening now, is never going to read in a textbook, but could really just have an aha moment and might help them be so much more efficient if it's their second degree, for example?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that there's a lot that you pick up along the way. One of the most important I learned very, very quickly is where the autosave button is. So that might sound like a little bit of a joke there, but certainly I'd lost quite an amount of work not hitting save correctly. So number one, most important, hit save specifically when you're writing a dissertation. I think maintaining structure and order within your environment is something that's very important. One of the most frustrating things that I came across, I guess, within a post-grad environment, writing dissertations, is not remembering and not knowing where a lot of the journal articles that I'd saved, and not being able to quickly identify where I'd read a certain piece of information. So maintaining that order and structure is incredibly important. Something that I think that I wish that I had learned whilst I was studying, but I'll take the liberty of just sharing a little bit of what I learned that I did wrong, is I'd read a book by David Allen called Getting Things Done, and this is a book that has certainly left a very large impression on me in terms of how to ensure that you're effective in the tasks that you set out. So one of the first things is jotting down your thoughts. So don't keep them in your head. Find a journal or a tool. I personally use Trello, which has worked exceptionally well for me. And just jot your thoughts down. Don't try and retain all the information in your mind from a to-do list perspective. If you're lying in bed and there's something that's keeping you awake at night, put it away, stick it in Trello, and go, great, I'm going to attend to that later. Being able to understand that you need to break things down into smaller pieces is something that's very important. I remember the first dissertation that I was writing, I was stuck. I couldn't get started. I didn't know how to get started. And looking back, I think that I learned to understand how to break things down into smaller pieces that were more tangible. When you look at, I'm going to do a dissertation that can sometimes be very overwhelming, and being able to identify when you personally are set to do certain things. So I know that I'm more of a late night owl as opposed to an early morning person. I'm not going to try and force myself to get up early and to try and study when I know that my brain cognitively is just not as effective in the morning. So go and do your exercise in the morning, go and do your reading in the morning, go and tidy stuff up, create the structure, and identify when are the right times for you. Being able to switch distractions off is another very, very important thing. I still find myself grappling with that today. So it's certainly something that goes with you far beyond just studying, but being able to turn your phone onto silent and to stop things buzzing at you and be able to just sit down and concentrate and get into the zone. I think that those are some of the more important things that stand out for me.
Great. Stacey, I wanted to go back to a couple of them. And I mean, I recall when, I did my undergrad engineering degree, and I mean, it was back in the days of floppy disks, those 3.5 inch, remember when you actually used to put something into your PC and then take it out, and, it was a physical memory. And I mean, it wasn't much before that email was news. So, I mean, the world has changed so rapidly, and it's just so exciting to kind of witness that and take advantage of it. But to your point about autosave, I always used to save something onto a floppy disk and then actually, take it out and almost put it in another room almost, or take it down to my friend's house if we were working in a project, So I would just feel so bad if I'd lost, we would come around to my house and we'd all work on a big project, or a report, etc. And if I lost that, I'd feel so bad for everybody else's work. But I mean, it sounded like you had sort of maybe a tough incident that happened, maybe just give us that. Looking back, I'm sure you can laugh, but at the time it was probably tough. So how much did you actually lose? I mean, what was that all about?
Yeah, so that I think was my second honors degree, and I'd spent a ton of time working on edits and updates that I'd received feedback on. literally like an entire day's worth of work, and I thought that I'd made some amazing progress and amazing breakthroughs. And when you're just in the zone and you've got that stuff right, and I can't remember exactly what went down, but late at night something, and I closed it and I realized that I'd lost all my work, and that's something that's heartbreaking, because at that moment in time you feel, well, I'm never going to be able to recoup the quality of work that you've done. And I guess within that emotional space, then you truly do not feel that you'll be able to salvage the lost work. So that was but you know what, it's been an incredibly important lesson. It was something that I needed to go through, because it made sure that forevermore I'm able to save function, and I double check that I've saved my stuff. So we call it a lesson. That's okay.
That's great. And I think obviously with cloud today, there's really so many tools that we have at our disposal to keep things safe and make sure that our hard work is protected. And just give me a bit of an insight to how you approach that, because I've been through similar things before. And I think once you get over the emotional shock and disappointment, you've either got a choice: you walk away and write it off and say, well, I'll worry about it tomorrow, or you say, the best chance I have of recovering that information is actually right now, because it's the freshest in my mind. And do you then sit down and just try and recreate it and spend another 2 or 3 hours, even though you've duplicated what you did before? At least when you get up, you'll have been pretty much back to where you were, and you'll just have to forgive yourself for that lost time. What was your mindset, generally speaking? Are you a kind of a walk away and come back to it person, or are you, let's sort this out and fix it as soon as possible type of person?
Yes, I think at that point in time, I was very much understanding that my frame of mind required me to de-escalate and make sure that the quality of work that I was going to reproduce was good. So I felt that after such a long haul, that it was best for me to perhaps just switch off, recalibrate, and attend to it in the morning. But yeah, what you say, I think holds a lot of value. If there's missing, or leverage your mind space, because you've obviously been in that zone. So even if it's not fully typing it out in perfect legible English, even just to pick up a pen and jot down some of the thoughts so it doesn't escape your mind, and you don't lose it completely. Because now that you say that, there would have certainly been a fortune of information that I wouldn't have been able to recall the next day. So if I'd written it down somewhere, just to be able to use it as some sort of a reference, that would have probably have been a better approach.
Yeah. I'm so excited. If you look at, what obviously Elon Musk and the guys are doing and sort of plugging into our brain, you would almost sort of be able to, I don't know, just rewind a sort of a time machine and just go and extract it straight out from, wherever your brain has been plugged into. Because, I think when you're solving these complex academic problems or dealing with these sorts of issues, and as you say, you've got into that flow, and it's almost impossible to recreate exactly that space and that insights that you had. And even though when I've been through those similar issues, I've managed to get the work done again, but it's never really been just as good as the original version that I then stupidly obviously lost, which was my own mistake. Yeah. Stacey, then a similar point, just as you mentioned, getting organized, and you mentioned referencing specifically, just talk me through, obviously, the more postgraduate level degrees, there's a greater emphasis on sources and citing, other work, and making sure that there's a gap in the literature so that your topic will make a contribution, etc. And I actually have a whole course on using EndNote as a referencing library, and then some real tips and tricks that I've sort of developed with EndNote. And there are obviously other tools out there, etc. But with referencing specifically and getting access to those papers and where you read things, what have you developed as a kind of personal best practice over the years that maybe you can give some ideas to our listeners about? Because obviously it is a mountain of literature out there that they are often asked to get to grips with.
Yeah, so I think that EndNote is probably one of the more popular tools that are out there, and certainly something that should be leveraged. I think that when I was completing my my postgrad degrees, tools such as that didn't really exist. I remember when I proposed doing my my data collection through SurveyMonkey. That was pretty groundbreaking. That I wasn't going and printing out printing out physical pieces of paper for people to complete. So I think that the way that technology has developed has allowed such tools to exist, and they should certainly be leveraged. But in terms of the way that I did it, it would probably not be considered a form of best practice or something that I would recommend doing now. It was very elaborate folders where I was able to understand high level what were the requirements or what were the outcomes of a particular journal article, and utilizing highlight functions. And I had an interesting Word document where I'd built out a whole bunch of links and how this entire ecosystem worked together. So I'm quite a visual person like that. So I found that I needed to do quite elaborate mind maps just to be able to ensure that I kept the literature review in a succinct way. So yeah.
And Stacey, I mean, maybe just given your high-level position in the university, one of the the common themes that I hear from a number of the students that I coach, and obviously we've got a large, I sort of look after a group. We have a Facebook community. I've been running a Wits postgraduate level writing workshop for a number of years, and a lot of the content, that's what went into the MOOC. But a very common theme with regards to referencing and managing sources, even though EndNote is quite popular, it is a little bit expensive for students. And I know that Wits does provide free licenses for Zotero, which is a cloud-based referencing library. But I'm just wondering, it'd be great if you could somewhere up there on the 10th, where the varsity is able to maybe negotiate student licenses with these organizations to give the students the tools is such a dramatic, empowering sort of principle, if you like, that
Sure.
that obviously then they need the skills to use it, and that's something that's a gap that I've tried to teach people. But often the barrier is just the cost and getting the license and getting the tool itself.
Yeah.
And I know it's a complex topic, and infrastructure and IT and all the rest of it, and cost management is obviously important, etc. But maybe something to think about from the university's perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I think that as a general principle, being able to allow postgraduates the most efficient way of being able to complete their research is obviously an important thing, because we do have a very large focus on the throughput of our postgrads. So I think that recommendations like that from alumni are certainly something that should be communicated up to management and up the line. So yeah, we'll definitely give some thought and have the relevant conversations.
And Stace, do you think, I mean, where we can help our students, and whether or not it's with licensing or the financial aspects, but even just with the training and the the support and the tips and the techniques, I just see a need. And the more that we can do, obviously, we're not on campus, and we historically have run these workshops physically, but we can still do them digitally. And my workshops have traditionally always been oversubscribed, and it's just, I've never found that I've been teaching them anything groundbreaking. It's just what I've learned the hard way and what I've taken the time to package and pass on to them. And yet the feedback has just always been phenomenal. So, would you support that we do more and more of that to help our students get through and be successful? Because we do have a dropout rate, of course, that we need to try and address and make sure that people get through their degrees and not drop out. I think, everything but dissertation. What's the phrase? You sort of do your degree, but then you just don't hand in at the end, and you just don't have the discipline to complete everything. Yeah. So Stacey, your thoughts, and from your own perspective, whether you had enough of that, and maybe you had the right mindset to go and get those skills and the training that you needed. But for many students, they almost need to be led on that path of self-discovery.
I think that there was of room for improvement. I think that where I was probably very fortunate is I was a very focused student. Coming from a school environment where I was probably a little bit of an underperformer, just not understanding the value that education placed. When I did move into the tertiary education space, it was, I guess it was a space where I became very self-motivated. I understood the goals that I wanted to achieve, and even though they were a little bit fuzzy at that point in time, that was the direction that I moved towards. I certainly think that if I had reached out to find the information or find the mentorship or find resources and tools to assist me, that it would have been a lot easier for me, and there would have probably been a lot more benefit that I would have been able to take out. So I think there's a lot of benefit in being able to work things out for yourself. But I think being able to have a conversation with someone, or to be able to find a mentor, the resource material to leverage, is also something that's very important. It's about being able to, the new term we're using is unlearn. So being able to unlearn your bad habits, and being able to relearn different, more effective ways of operating. And that's within a university environment, and certainly far beyond into the working world as well. Adaptability.
Yeah, Stacey, I wanted to pick up on just a couple of topics that you mentioned there. One was, to get that coaching and mentoring support. And I find, I'll often just, provide maybe a 30-minute call with somebody that's stuck or something. And, I don't charge for that or anything like that. It's just having a conversation with somebody that needs someone to talk to. And 90% of the time, it's more about asking the right questions and helping them on their own journey of self-discovery. And, once they come to that realization, and maybe there are some practical aspects that I can bring into that conversation that they can learn from or not, depending on what they think is going to work for them. But, firstly, the motivation of speaking to somebody and getting the encouragement that they can get through this difficult space that they're dealing with. And second of all, the fact that the questions often unlock the thought processes for themselves, whereas maybe they've got into a bit of a paralysis around a certain issue. And when somebody like a coach or a mentor just asks them the right questions, it opens it up for them in their own mind. And then you get the sustainable benefits because they've come to the realization, and the coach has just facilitated that process. Yeah. It hasn't been a sort of a taught process. It's been an awareness and awakening of them, of their own, from their own selves, and sort of, the benefit that I've seen the students get from that, has been phenomenal. So as much of that as we can do, I think it's going to help them.
Yeah, Peter, I completely agree with that line of thinking. It's very often about just prompting the correct questions. I think that if one were to I guess use an analogy of an ecosystem, is sometimes our minds get into a space where this is the problem and that's the solution. That's not true. This is the problem and that's solution A, but there's also solution B and C and D. And what is the optimal way of getting to your endpoint? And is the endpoint that you see your endpoint actually your endpoint? So I think that when you have someone available that is able to prompt different questions and push you in terms of how to think about something in a different way, is something that's of a great deal of value. So I think that the work that you're doing is vital to being able to assist students through the process of learning, and interrogating the information that's presented in front of us.
And Stacey, arguably, and we may return to some level of normality in terms of learning together and working together, etc. But it'll be reduced from what we've had in the past. And I think that loss of personal interaction, in the workspace we talk about the conversation at the water cooler, but at the university it's the conversation at the canteen, and there's so many opportunities for those ad hoc conversations, and now people will need to be a lot more intentional to compensate for that. That I think it's going to become even more critical. So you could still find people going through a full-time experience at university and interacting with thousands of students on campus, and yet feeling very lonely and left out of the process and a large system. And now, with arguably a lot less on-campus interaction and a lot less class-based learning, that could become an even bigger problem that we need to solve in the future, and just be even a lot more intentional about reaching out to people and finding them where they're at and providing a facilitated, improving them and helping them stay on the path.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is something that that is very true. The strength of a network and the strength of being able to have a conversation with a human being, as opposed to, you know, watching a video or something that's very one-sided, that you're just receiving this information, is not the optimal learning process. The optimal learning process is being able to interact with other people and being able to discuss and debate and have conversations around, I agree, I disagree, or that's interesting, or have you thought about that? So the value of human relationships is very important. And I think that the new way in which the world works, we're going to have to be more intentional around being able to build those networks and those relationships. And I think that the skills that one will learn through being able to have networks and relationships, moving from a university environment through into a working world environment, is of core importance.
Great, Stacey. I mean, this has just been such a wonderful conversation, and we've touched on so many different topics that I think will be, incredibly useful, to students and many others involved in the education field, and particularly the tertiary, education space, and how that's changing, and will continue to change. And I'm wondering, Stacey, if you've got any sort of final thoughts, just from an individual academic perspective. You touched earlier on about how you felt that you didn't make best use of your school years, and for whatever reason, but then something changed, in your academic career thereafter, and you became more motivated, etc. It sounded like a couple of light bulbs sort of went on for you, and you figured this out as you went along. But what would be your words of advice or suggestions to people to follow in your footsteps, and obviously on their own journey have that same awakening, if you like, of how to get organized, how to get motivated, how to get focused, how to achieve their goals, etc. Is there anything from your perspective now that you think people can take away and practically start implementing in their lives, almost from tomorrow?
So I think that the term, that the quote, "You are the master of your own destiny," is true. You have the opportunity, not every day, but every moment of every day, to decide what it is that you're going to do with that time. So it's important to be able to understand what are the sorts of activities and decisions that we make moment by moment. Where are these decisions actually taking us in our lives? And I think that it's important to just sit back and actually just reflect on the decisions that we're making. Are these decisions that we're making something that's moving us towards a goal, or is it just random and just hoping that we're going to come out on the other side? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm not a hockey fan, but a quote by Wayne Gretzky that says, "You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take." Take the shot. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get it wrong. And if you're going to get it wrong, that's okay, because you're going to learn from that. So I think from a philosophy point of view, those are two of the things that I hold very important to myself from a mind frame perspective. And I think that one must give attention to where a particular headspace is at. So that's the first thing. The second thing is as we'd discussed a little bit earlier, being able to get things done by understanding what are the list of items that we need to do for the day. Not I need to do an entire dissertation, but just for now, right now, what is it that we need to do today? And just be able to tick those items off the list, so you finish the day and you've done something constructive with your time, and that you're able to actually see what it is that you've done with your day and keep a record of that. So those I guess are some of the more tangible things that come to mind in that respect. And again, just understanding where you are personally at and what are the best tasks to be completing at different times of the day to ensure that it's time well spent.
Stacey, that's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, I think if anybody can put any one of those into practice, it'll make a massive difference in their lives. And I certainly do encourage people listening to take, these words of wisdom and really reflect on them and, put them into practice as much as possible. So Stacey, give us a sense of where you are now. And I mean, are you going to sign up for your 5th degree? Is there a record at Wits, by the way? What is the most number of degrees, Wits degrees completed? Are you aware by an individual?
So Peter, I'm going to need to go and do some research on that and figure that one out. That's an interesting question. I don't know.
I think I read somewhere it's 5, to be honest. I think I read in one of the alumni magazines, but I could be wrong. But maybe something to think about.
Definitely, I'm going to go do that research. I think that's a very interesting question. I'm going to be quoting that in future engagements.
And if you did, I mean, what would be your next? Would it be a pivot, or would it be more in the current direction, or are you going to put your energies into other things, like obviously this big role that you've got on the Convocation, etc.?
Yeah, so I think that at some point in time I needed to manage again where my headspace was at and where my goals were moving towards. So I had registered for another degree, for a PhD. And figured out at that point in time it was not correct. So that was probably about 2 years ago. And I had very large vested interests in 2 startup businesses that I was very involved in. And I felt that the energies needed to go into the startup businesses that I was involved. So I put that on the back burner for a little bit. I think that my passion towards the education space is something that will always remain within me. I think that the interest that I have for constantly learning and acquiring new information is just something that's become enjoyable for me. So I think that every opportunity that I have, I look out for interesting information wherever and whatever shape and form it comes. So it's certainly on the radar to go and get another qualification. Even maybe a MOOC that might take me a little bit shorter as well, just to fill, to do over a couple of months. But yeah, we will see where the journey takes us at this moment in time, concentrating on some of the startup related stuff.
And yeah, that's awesome, Stacey. And I mean, back then when you had signed up to the PhD, or if you were going to do one in the future, was there a specific topic of research that you were interested in doing and sort of making a contribution through that somehow?
Yeah, so that was specifically relating to something to do with neuroplasticity and innovation. So I didn't get deep enough to be able to have a well enough informed conversation about it. But as a high level, though, that was where there was an interest that was sparked. So it was something to do in the lines of that. So combining my psychology background as well as my innovation related interests.
I think that's so fascinating when you get that sort of interdisciplinary research. It's often on the edges, and when topics overlap that the magic really happens. So and that only comes when you've actually dabbled or gone into depth in a couple of different areas, and you can see how bringing them together. And often when you look at the technology in the startup world, it's often the combination of technologies that creates the unique innovations. It's not only the monoline sort of innovations on their own that really disrupt the market. So that sounds absolutely fantastic, Stacey. I mean, and the startups, just quickly, are they also in the education space or completely different?
So the one is in the education space. So it's an edtech business. So edtech is education technology, and that is a mobile app. excuse me, a mobile app that is directed towards early childhood education. The term that we know is ECD, and basically what we've done is developed gaming modules that allow kids in successfully teaching them alphabet recognition. So I think from a cognitive development perspective, it's important within all environments, but within an emerging markets environment, that we understand that brain development is at its peak, at its maximum during the younger years of an individual's life. So it's obviously very important that we're getting students through from a postgrad perspective, but also ensuring that we are giving them the correct foundation to be able to move through the entire educational system, whatever form and shape that may be or may become. So that is the first startup. The second startup was a business that looked at pitch dens, so creating again ecosystems for startups, where we allowed startups to pitch in front of angels, VC, and seed investors. We built a community probably of around about 5,000 entrepreneurs and entrepreneurially connected individuals such as investors. So it was a really interesting business to be involved in as well. So those have been some of the areas of focus in my life.
Wonderful, Stacey. Well, I mean, for somebody that's been able to get a lot done, you're certainly willing to take on a lot, and that's fantastic. We need people like yourself to disrupt and get involved and show the way, and just demonstrate, I think, to other people that it is possible to get a lot done, to stay focused, but equally to hold back on something that perhaps could have extended you beyond what you were capable of doing, like you put your PhD on pause for a while. And sometimes those are also very, very well thought through rational decisions that are just as important as the yes decisions, I guess. So we'll look forward to seeing when you sort of, arrive back at that and loop back into that PhD world, and maybe have you on again to talk about your reflections about going for the 5th degree, and if that's going to then set or equal the record at Wits. Be very interested to chat more about that.
Wonderful,
Stacey,
Peter.
it's been a wonderful conversation, so really thank you so much, and look forward to having you back on the show at some point.
Super. Thank you so very much for hosting these very important conversations. I have no doubt that students are going to take a lot of benefit out of leveraging your extensive knowledge and time taken to package all this information together. I think that it's such an important thing that you're doing, and wish you the very best of luck with the pursuits in this space.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thanks, Peter.
Cheers then.
Bye.
Stacey, thanks very much.